What do the cool kids like to say, Mitch? It may be cold outside, but it's heating up on the hardwood. That's how we're feeling. Welcome into the Women's Basketball Podcast. Mia O'Brien, Mitchell Northam. Mitch, what's the temperature up there in North Carolina where you're coming at us from?
Oh, man, it do be cold everywhere. I think it's supposed to get into the teens this week. It is currently 28 degrees. Where I'm at, tomorrow is supposed to be a low of 17, which is extremely not what I want. But here we are.
Well, I'm sure it's cold where you are, but at the same time, I know the temperatures as high as they can possibly be at Cameron Indoor, at the Dean Dome just down the road from you, much, much more. It's about 30 degrees here in Northeast Florida where I'm coming at you from. And I was informed today that we don't have salt trucks, even though we're supposed to get an ice storm this week. All the more reason to lock in, sit down, turn on your TV, and watch some elite women's college basketball, as well as professional women's basketball. That's right. Unrivaled debuted this past weekend. We've got thoughts on that. We've got thoughts on WNBA free agency, which will begin later this week. But first, Mitch, for the second time in as many weeks, no, we're not leading with our her of the week. We're leading with how the heck is CaitlinClark not even on a basketball court right now? And she still is the name we're talking about when it comes to sports. Yes, I couldn't let the program begin without paying homage to Caitlin in Taylor Swift's suite. Honestly, for Caitlin's sake, I mean, I know ESPN did the cool little carousel. I'm very excited for her because she's like fulfilling her destiny of wanting to be Taylor Swift's best friend. So shout out to CaitlinClark for that.
Yeah, CaitlinClark, Taylor Swift, pretty much like the talk of the weekend. Them two sitting together in the booth. It was, my wife does not really care about basketball or football at all, but she cares very much about Taylor Swift and those. So this crossed into our lexicon here. And then, she rolled her eyes when I made a meme about Taylor and Caitlin having a conversation. And in my mind, the first thing that came to thought was the scene from Revenge of the Sith where Darth Sidious tells Anakin Skywalker about the tragedy of Darth Plagueis the Wise. So that was fun. I enjoyed that very much. And the high-fiving and the hugs, and looked like Caitlin had a great time. It looked like Tay Swift had a great time. So, maybe we'll see them together in the booth again this weekend when Josh Allen and the Bills come to town.
It's chestnut checkers. She's not even playing basketball, and we're still talking about her. I don't think she intended for it to be that way. I think the narrative online is that we did. But, hey, we love CC here on this program. We love all of our women's college basketball and professional women's basketball, including Vanderbilt, which is officially, Mitch, I'm planting the flag, the storming capital of the continental United States. What do you mean, Mia? We'll get to that here in just a little bit. Shout out to Vandy. And let's begin traditionally, as we do each and every week, with our her of the week. This week, we give the award to someone who we talk about a good bit on this program and someone who made ESPN's all-transfer team. And by some accounts, she's considered one of the top transfers in the country, and that's Kentucky's Georgia Amoore, Mitch.
Yeah, Georgia Amoore averaged 22.5 points, 9.5 assists this past week as Kentucky got 2 wins. I feel like Kentucky, we talked about them a lot in the preseason, and then they had that loss in North Carolina, and I feel like they've been kind of going under the radar since then, but they still only have 1 loss this season. I feel like all the air in the SEC is just sucked up by LSU and South Carolina and Texas and Oklahoma. I mean, Kentucky is right there. They're humming along. Like I said, just 1 loss. Georgia Amoore is certainly a big reason why she's averaging 18.5 points and 7.5 assists per game this season. Second in the nation in assists, which is cool to see. And yeah, certainly a big reason why Kenny Brooks has had success at Virginia Tech and now success at Kentucky. Thought it was also cool this past weekend that Georgia's old teammate Elizabeth Kitley had her jersey retired at Virginia Tech and had her own bobblehead night, which was cool. I wish I could have gotten up to Blacksburg to grab one of those. But yeah, so pretty good week if you're a fan of those Virginia Tech teams that made the Final Four. Georgia Amoore still playing at a high level, and Liz Kitley, looking forward to seeing her making her WNBA debut at some point this season.
Kentucky, the only other undefeated team in the SEC, not named LSU or South Carolina. Something tells me they will make an appearance a little bit later in Chef's Table. But to your point, Mitch, this is a Kentucky team that, quite frankly, unless they get picked off, they have a manageable next 3 games coming up at A&M, home against Arkansas and Alabama. That A&M game may be a little tricky, and I know Alabama's in the top 25, but that game will be in Lexington before they travel to Norman, Oklahoma. That's on the 2nd of February, though, so we could flip the calendar to the second month of the year. Kentucky still unblemished in the SEC. We've got a whole lot more SEC talk, but first, let's lead off this week's starting five with the professional ranks. Unrivaled made its debut Friday on the Turner TNT True TV network. 2 games on Friday, 2 games on Saturday, 2 games Monday night. I was locked in on night 1, Mitch, and a couple big takeaways from me. Rickea Jackson, I understand she was an all-rookie selection for the WNBA, and I know we were all so caught up in the CaitlinClark, Angel Reese, Cameron Brink until, unfortunately, her rookie season was interrupted by the torn ACL. We were so fixated on those marquee, quote-unquote, names from the college ranks, and that's not to say that the former Tennessee star wasn't a marquee name. I mean, for crying out loud, she did go top 5 in the WNBA draft, but I don't think I appreciated her game until I saw it in the 3-on-3 format on Friday night.
Yeah, I think Rickea Jackson is a really good player. I got to see her up close about a year ago now, or almost a year ago, in the first round of the NCAA tournament at NC State. Tennessee lost that second round matchup to the Wolfpack at home here at Reynolds Coliseum. But the entire defensive game plan for NC State was really built around stopping Rickea Jackson. And I thought, especially after Cameron Brink went out this past season for the Sparks, she had some really good performances and kind of came on late and really got to shine for the Sparks there. And I think she's going to have a really, solid and long WNBA career. And yeah, I think this kind of 3-on-3 game is really suited to her skills and abilities. My big kind of takeaway from Unrivaled, there's a couple things. I love that, number one, it was easy for people to watch and find. These games are on TNT and True TV.
They're not on Baller TV. They're not on Baller TV. You do say that. Oh,
not on Baller TV, not on Flow Hoops. If you're a basketball fan, you know how to find TNT and True TV. And they're also streaming on Max. And so if you're a fan of The Sopranos or The Wire, you get Unrivaled also, which is great. And my other thing was just like, Nafisa Collier looks awesome. Looks like she hasn't missed a beat from her Defensive Player of the Year season. I think she's going to be in contention once again for a MVP type season. She's playing awesome. Still has that chemistry with Courtney Williams, which is fun to see with the Lunar Owls. And Skylar Diggins-Smith was a lot of fun too. So yeah, this is going to be fun to pay attention to. Sort of, on the back burner of women's college basketball this season.
2 other notes from me. Ryan Howard, another player who we know from her time with the U.S. women's national team, is an elite 3-on-3 player, but I was reminded of that on Friday night. I am so fascinated, and we don't have the time today, but at some point or another, we got to talk Carl Semesco, Ryan Howard, the Atlanta Dream. I am fascinated to see that combination of head coach, marquee player, and what it looks like in the ATL this summer. I do, of course, have to give flowers to Kate Martin. A double-double in her debut for the Laces on Saturday. 12 points, a game-high 10 boards, 2 steals, 1 assist, 2 3-pointers. 5 of 10 from the floor, and that, of course, included the final shot of the game that sealed an 86-48 win for the Laces over the Phantom. I do think my favorite team name and my favorite jersey color combination is the Lunar Owls, which is a bit conflicting because I like their roster. I love Nafisa Collier, and I love her game. Love our friend Courtney Williams. But at the same time, I'm like, but I like some of those players, and I like some of those players. It's a good problem to have. I guess that's the whole point of Unrivaled.
Yeah, the Lunar Owls is a great name. I kind of wish more teams leaned into like that sort of naming convention instead of just like Laces and Phantom. Like, I just love the kind of double name of it, Lunar Owls. I don't know who came up with that, but shout out to them.
Elite name. Maybe it's because my favorite color is purple. And also shout out to Kate Martin, officially the face of not 1 but 2 franchises. If you had told me that a calendar year ago, I would not have believed you, much like T Swift and CaitlinClark in the same suite. Let's keep it moving with this week's starting 5. Back to the college front we go. And Mitch, I believe you're going to take us to some games that you were a part of, or at the very least following along closely because it involved Carol Lawson's Blue Devils.
Yeah, so I went Thursday night to Cameron Indoor Stadium and saw the Duke Blue Devils just put the absolute clamps on Cal. Cal scored a season low 38 points. They had a season high 30 turnovers. They made 2 3-pointers. I mean, this is a Cal team that was coming into this game as, having one of the best offenses in the country, and Duke kind of needing, a little bit of a renaissance, a little bit of a spark after, losing that rock fight to North Carolina, and then kind of eking out a win over Virginia in the game that immediately followed that one. I was not expecting this. I thought that Cal would give them a good game, but they absolutely did not. Duke just put the hurting on them. And you got a great game from Toby Fournier, one of the best freshmen in the country, probably the front runner at this point for ACC Rookie of the Year. We've talked about her a lot. This was her first double-double, 23 points and 11 rebounds in just 23 minutes off the bench. She was awesome. And then, Duke followed that up by beating Stanford as well. Another really good defensive performance. Let Stanford shoot just 32% from the floor, forced Stanford into 19 turnovers, won that game 74-49. Ashlyn Jackson was awesome in that game. I think this is kind of the best. We're kind of seeing Duke get back to the best that they can be on defense. And they're going to have another game upcoming this week. They're going to play at SMU, which is kind of bottom of the barrel of the ACC. I'm sure they're going to win that game pretty easily. Then they got to go to Georgia Tech, and then they got to go to NC State. I'm real curious to see kind of which Duke shows up in those games, because we have kind of seen a little bit of an inconsistent Duke this year. We've seen the really good offense, like when they put up, 80 plus at Maryland. We've seen the really good defense. Now, with this performance at Cal, that rock fight against UNC, can they kind of put it all together to make sure they stay in that top tier of the ACC? Can they go into McCamish Pavilion and Reynolds Coliseum and beat Georgia Tech and NC State? Looking forward to seeing it.
Although I'm not going to lie, Mitch, the last time that I questioned Duke was against Virginia.
Mm.
And then I watched Virginia against NC State this weekend. And now I'm beginning to think that maybe the Hoos are just a year away. And maybe that's why Duke found itself in an absolute rock fight up in Charlottesville a few weeks ago as well. Because for those of you keeping score, yes, Notre Dame undefeated, the top team in the ACC as of this writing. Duke, NC State 6-1 apiece, Louisville just behind at 6-2. And that is the top 4 of the standings in the ACC as of the recording of this podcast.
Yeah, and Louisville, despite losing that game on Sunday to Virginia Tech, I think they're coming on stronger. Like we talked about before, this was kind of be a bumpy year for Jeff Walz and the Cardinals, with all the young players that they have. It got really bumpy, in December. I think they've started to figure it out a little bit in conference play. So curious to see kind of how they finish the season. And NC State's schedule is only going to get tougher. They still got to play Carolina. They got to play Duke. They got to play Notre Dame. So they haven't seen any of those teams yet. So we'll see what the Wolfpack can come up with. But really good week from Isaiah James this past week.
From the ACC to the SEC, I won't go out there on a limb and say it's the best conference in women's college basketball. It certainly is in men's college hoops, but it does feature one of the only 2 undefeated teams remaining in women's college basketball. And it also features the number 2 team in women's college basketball. That's where I'd like to go for number 3 in this week's starting 5. Mitch, South Carolina. They're South Carolina again. They get to face that aforementioned one of the 2 remaining undefeated teams in LSU later this week. The stats from South Carolina's 101-60 victory over a 13th ranked Oklahoma on Sunday afternoon are stupid. These stats are from Alexa Filipao of ESPN. Let me rattle these off for you. First and foremost, I'm going to the last one first. South Carolina is the first team with multiple 40-point wins versus AP top 25 opponents in a season since 2015-2016 UConn. For those of you keeping score, that was the last time UConn won the national championship, just to put that out there. South Carolina's third 30-point win of the season. That was versus an AP-ranked team. The rest of Division I has 3 such wins together as a collective. South Carolina's largest win over a ranked team in program history. Now 7 times this season that Dawn Staley has had 50 bench points. No other D1 team has more than 4 such games. The Gamecocks have 7. I was texting you during this game. The fact that Malaysia Fulwiley, who was in the running for this week's Her of the Week on today's episode, comes off the bench still. I don't want to call Dawn a hockey coach because, especially in these parts in Jacksonville, it has a negative connotation to how the Jaguars defense was run this year. But the fact that she can not only go 11 deep, but that she can just bring in these waves of equally as impressive starting caliber players in the Southeastern Conference, it boggles your mind. And what's so wild about it, I don't think outside of Fulwiley, who certainly made a name for herself in the NCAA tournament last year, maybe Raven Johnson just because of the longevity, I don't believe there is a single household name on that roster compared to the Dawn Staley teams we've seen over the last decade.
Yeah, I think you could maybe make a case for like Tahina Pau or Raven Johnson just because they have been around a little while. But if you're talking about just pure like hey, who on this team is going to make an All-American team?
Malaysia Fulwiley would be in the running for Player of the Year if, I don't know, Mitch. She played a grand total of 23 minutes in this game. Hannah Hidalgo in an absolute blowout last night was playing, mind you, with a bum foot for lack of a better term. She was playing on Sunday night with 2 minutes left in the ball game in a blowout victory.
Absolutely. Malaysia Fulwiley only averages 18.8 minutes per game this season, which is wild. She was the SEC tournament MVP last year. She was, maybe the catalyst for like how they blew out North Carolina in the second round of the NCAA tournament last year. One of the best players throughout the NCAA tournament last year. I mean, just a wrecking ball when you put her in the game and just kind of let her athleticism sort of flourish and just give her freedom to do whatever she wants to do. She's a menace on offense, on defense, can hit the 3 ball. She's shooting 50% from the floor this year, which is super impressive.
And she comes off the bench, folks. She's not starting. Like it's the biggest luxury in all of sports, arguably. Sorry, New York Mets.
For all the, I think kind of maybe, some of the flaws we pointed out about South Carolina this year, not having a true center, not looking as formidable as they have in years past. This is still one of the deepest teams in the country. We've talked about Maryland a couple of times and how deep that they are and how their depth is going to help them in March. South Carolina's got the same depth that they had last year. Just they don't have Camila Cardozo. They don't have that true center. But all these guards and all these other great players that they have, they're going to help them. Joyce Edwards, Tahina Pau, Chloe Kitts, Tessa Johnson, Sanaya Fagan, Ashlyn Watkins, no longer here, out for the year with an injury. But then you got Bree Hall and you got Raven Johnson. Like they just have players that they can kind of pull from for everywhere. And I thought that, I saw the spread on this game. I didn't pick this one for making money with Mitch last week. But Oklahoma, was a 16.5-point underdog. And I thought, they got Reagan Beers. Like that's a good matchup inside. Like maybe they can keep it, within that. No way. South Carolina covered the spread with ease. This is still like you look at any defensive statistic on, her hoop stats or whatever website you want to look at. And South Carolina is in the tops. This is still a lockdown defensive unit playing the way that Dawn Staley wants to play basketball.
It's only the starting 5. We've already hit the ACC, the SEC. Now let's kick it over to the Big 12. A bit of breaking news as we record this podcast, Mitch. One of my favorite players in women's college basketball. Not great news out of the Little Apple.
Yeah. So, I was planning on this morning kind of coming on this podcast and talking about how underrated and maybe how Kansas State is kind of flying a bit under the radar. And, they've only got 1 loss and, hey, maybe we should kind of take them a little bit more serious as like not only contenders for the Big 12, but maybe a run to the Final Four or something. And then, we get this press release from Kansas State that says Ayoka Lee is going to be sidelined following an injury to her foot. This is from the statement. It says a return before the end of the regular season is probable, but more will be known in the next couple of weeks. Lee suffered the setback during the game against Arizona State. An x-ray was conducted on Sunday. MRI taken, confirmed a fracture in her foot. So Ayoka Lee's got a broken foot, and that's massive for Kansas State, I think. If anybody's watched Kansas State this year or in years past where Ayoka Lee has been healthy, that team revolves around her. I got the chance last year, as a lot of listeners know, to kind of follow along with North Carolina for a season. And they played Kansas State last year in the Gulf Coast Showcase down in Florida. And so I got to be in the room when they were presenting the scouting report for Kansas State. And at the top, and the bulk of the scouting report was about Ayoka Lee. And it was about not letting her go over her left shoulder and turning her into a distributor instead of a scorer. So this is how all teams game plan for Ayoka Lee, and how all teams game plan for Kansas State. The key is stopping Ayoka Lee. Okay, well, now you don't have to worry about Ayoka Lee. And so what does that mean for Kansas State? Kind of going forward the rest of the season, like if you're going to count out Ayoka Lee, until the Big 12 tournament comes, until March Madness comes around, it's probably going to hurt your seeding. You're probably going to take some more losses. You only have one right now, but the Big 12 is no joke this year. You've got a really good TCU team who, by the way, has a dominant center in Sidonia Prince. And here's where I kind of fault Jeff Mittie a bit. Because Kansas State with Ayoka Lee, they've had these injury troubles with her over the past couple of years, really. I mean, over the past probably 3 or 4 years at this point. Ayoka Lee's been in college a long time, and she's had a lot of injury difficulties. You could have gone into the transfer portal and gotten a backup big at some point, and they just don't really have that on this roster. They've got a lot of really good guards. I think Serena Sundell is one of the best point guards in the country. But those good guards are only going to get you so far when you've essentially engineered this team to revolve around Ayoka Lee. And so this team still has to play Iowa State, who has a really good post player in Audi Crooks. They still got to play TCU, like I mentioned. They still got to play West Virginia, which is looking like one of the best teams in the Big 12. And they got to play that game at West Virginia. And the Mountaineers just beat Iowa State by, I think, close to 20 points in Morgantown. So the rest of the way here, I think, is going to be tough sledding for Kansas State. And, if they didn't have this injury, like I said, I was going to come on this podcast and talk about them being kind of a dark horse title contender. And without a healthy Ayoka Lee, I just don't see it. So that's the Big 12 race. I think now I'm looking at TCU in West Virginia. Yeah.
And even before that press release Monday morning released by the university athletic department, Mittie had said yesterday post-game, and thank you to Zach Deloach with the Mercury Sports newspaper for getting this out on the internet. In the post-game presser, he said, quote, "It's not good, guys. I don't have a definitive update. It's not going to be a week or two." And that was yesterday prior to the MRI. So yeah, not good. Certainly affects the trajectory of the Big 12. That, to your point, with Texas and Oklahoma out of the picture, might be as wide open as it's been, given that Iowa State, TCU, up and down moments to be sure. I would honestly go with the Horned Frogs just based off of the past success of those key transfers at their previous stops and the fact that they are gelling together. But it's going to be, of any of the conferences, I would argue, yeah, I would say the Big Ten's open
Sure.
west of or east of the Mississippi. I think it's wide open. West of the Mississippi, I believe the top of the Big Ten has been spoken for. But the Big 12, on the other hand, I think it's wide open. And I do want to note, not that all storylines lead back to CaitlinClark, but in her dominant last 2 seasons at the University of Iowa, in which they were the runner-up at the national championship game, they split with South Carolina. They beat them in the Final Four in 23. They lost to them in the championship game in 24. LSU, they lost to in the championship game in 23. They beat them in the Elite Eight in 24. Yes, they did technically beat Kansas State on a neutral floor, but do you know what team with what superstar went into Iowa City and knocked off Lisa Bluder's Hawkeyes and also defeated them in 2022, 2023 in Manhattan? That would be Jeff Mittie's Kansas State Wildcats.
Yeah, that was a good little non-conference rivalry there, for a couple seasons. And yeah, I was at that game, the neutral site game where Iowa kind of got that revenge back. But yeah, I mean, to go into Carver Hawkeye and beat CaitlinClark's Iowa, that speaks to how good this team is when Ayoka Lee is healthy. But without her, I don't know that they make it out of the first weekend of the tournament. So yeah, I mean, going to be interested to see kind of how the Big 12 shakes out the rest of the season. Like you talked about, we got a good Iowa State team. We got a good TCU team. West Virginia really, coming along strong here. Utah showing some life. Baylor showing some life. So yeah, we're going to see. I think that's kind of the wide open conference race at this point.
I'll get mad about Iowa later, especially since you noted that Ioka Lee-led Kansas State doesn't get out of the first round. I would argue a CaitlinClark-led Iowa versus a non-CaitlinClark-led Iowa. Well, we'll save that for last call. Let's wrap up this week's starting five, Mitch, with a return to the WNBA. Free agency begins later this week. The following players have been cored. For those of you who are still newish to the women's basketball game, cored is essentially the equivalent of the franchise tag in the National Football League. Here are the players that have been cored according to The Wire. Kelsey Plum of the Las Vegas Aces, Satu Sabally by the Dallas Wings, Brianna Stewart of the New York Liberty, Kelsey Mitchell of the Indiana Fever, Gabby Williams of the Seattle Storm, and Alyssa Thomas of the Connecticut Sun. Mitch, we spent some time last week on Satu Sabally, who's made it known that she does not want to play with Dallas. She's played her final game with the Wings. The expectation is that will be a core and trade. I found most interesting, before I get your take on which of these corings was, I guess coring's a word. We're going to make it a word. Which of these core designations was most surprising to you? Kelsey Mitchell getting the core designation and the Fever not actually officially announcing it or any sort of breaking news. They unveiled the plans for their new practice facility, the new standalone facility, which will open in 2027. And yet there was no mention of Kelsey Mitchell and that transaction. It came through on The Wire and several reporters picked up on it and said, hey, by the way, they cored her. And meanwhile, they unveil these plans for 2027 and Kelsey Mitchell's face is on the banner on the side of the rendering. And so it makes me wonder, I'm assuming she wants to play, even if it's a core designation, knowing full well that the new CBA next year will allow her to make more money. So while, yes, you're hedging your bet on playing well enough on essentially a one-year contract this year that you'll be able to really cash in when the new CBA kicks in after this season. But at the same time, I mean, aren't the Fever trying to say, hey, we're running it back. We're just bringing Stephanie White in. We're bringing her home, but we're keeping the core. Literally, like, that was very surprising to me.
Yeah, and I'll agree with you. I think that the Kelsey Mitchell thing was perplexing, just in the sense that, like you mentioned, when Stephanie White first got the job, and she talked about kind of our big three here, it was Caitlin and Leah and Kelsey. Those were the players that she was kind of talking about. I think that the Fever very much see Kelsey Mitchell as a part of their future plans. I wonder if this is kind of, sometimes you see this with NFL teams, like they'll tag the player just to, make sure that they don't hit free agency. And then later on down the line, they'll work out kind of a long-term contract. So I wonder if maybe they're waiting for the pomp and circumstance to sort of, agree to a longer, more lucrative kind of thing with Kelsey Mitchell, or if they're just going to ride out this core. And yeah, I mean, there's a lot of uncertainty with the new CBA. So, I don't necessarily know what's going to happen with that.
Outside of there will be more money to be made.
Absolutely.
One way or another.
Yeah. And I think that Unrivaled is kind of, putting a little bit of pressure on that, considering that, the average salary in Unrivaled is more than what I think the Supermax is. I think my math on that is right. They're both around about $200,000
when you account for equity in stake in the league. Yes.
Yeah. So if you're the W, like you look at that and you're like, okay, well, you probably have to step it up, right? I think that the W has enough new owners in it now, enough new blood where they can kind of agree to, yes, we need to invest more in salaries and we need to invest more in amenities and that sort of thing. And, I'm sure that they'll get a deal done. I don't have the sense that like we're headed towards a lockout or anything. I do think it was a good move by Dallas to court Satu Sabally instead of just letting her hit the open market, without getting anything in return. I would say how that plays out is going to be interesting.
It could get ugly.
Just because, it could get ugly. I mean, it was just, I think a year ago that, Elena Deladon and the Mystics kind of went into this same sort of game of chicken where, EDD wanted out and the Mystics didn't want to let her out and they cored her and then she just didn't play for them. So I wonder kind of how that goes. And then, the Tebow's got fired. So how did that work? So I kind of wonder how this is going to go with Satu Sabali, if Dallas is going to play hardball or if they're immediately just like, we're coring you, but it's just so we can trade you and they'll get the best deal that's out there for her.
And with free agency set to begin this week, certainly Gabby Williams and Alyssa Thomas, for that matter, were thought to be maybe intriguing names potentially on the open market. I don't think there was ever a question of if the Aces would core Kelsey Plum or not. Now I think the question becomes, does she want to blaze her own path, have a new chapter? A lot of speculation with so many members of the Aces headed to the Bay Area with the Valkyries to help that franchise get off the ground running. I joked earlier in the pod, Kate Martin is the face of the Golden State Valkyries as of right now. Maybe Teme Fagbenley can say something too, but other than that, like Kate Martin is the face right now. Would Kelsey Plum want to venture off on her own in a tag and trade situation?
Yeah, and I wonder about the tag and trade situation, for Alyssa Thomas as well. With Stephanie White no longer there, you have a new head coach. Dewana Bonner and Brianna Jones are unrestricted free agents. I imagine that Alyssa Thomas is not going to want to come back to a team that's kind of in rebuilding mode at the age of 32, especially coming off of, one of her best seasons that she's had. So I wonder if, after being cored now, if she requests a trade from the Sun and the Sun, trade her for kind of pieces to rebuild, that team around under a new head coach.
With that said, let's look ahead to the week ahead in women's college basketball. Sorry, Unrivaled fans, we're not going to break down necessarily the slate this week, although we're looking forward to weekend number 2 of this brand new league down in South Florida. We also have a lot of college basketball to get to. It begins on Thursday night. This was the 1 ounce of women's college basketball I was able to fit into my daily radio program on this Monday as we're recording, Mitch. I am spreading our bit. I am spreading the gospel of the Kim Caldwell baby bump. Of course, my 2 co-hosts wanted to talk about Kim Mulkey trying to give her the present like we talked about on last week's episode, in case you missed it, in honor of Pat Summitt giving Kim a gift once upon a time. I don't want to talk about that. I want to talk about the baby bump. She's due here. We're recording on Monday, January 20th at night. And technically, Kim Caldwell's due date is today. I don't know by the time this pod drops if she will have popped. I don't know if she's going to be coaching Thursday night. But one way or another, it leads us off with this week's Chef's Table.
Yeah, no baby Caldwell yet, and we'll see if she's on the sidelines on Thursday down in Austin. This is Thursday night at 9 p.m. Eastern on the SEC Network. Number 17 Tennessee now at number 7 Texas. Tennessee coming off a tough loss to Vanderbilt. I know you mentioned earlier Vanderbilt being the new court storming capital of the world here.
It was an awesome finish. Like it was two.
Yeah.
In terms of end of game sequences, it's up there, men's or women's college basketball, one of the best 2-minute finishes in the sport this year.
Yeah, and the interesting thing, like I thought about, that finish between Vanderbilt and Tennessee, Michaela Blakes hits the buzzer beater. The day before, her brother, Jalen Blakes, hit the buzzer beater at the Dean Dome here in Chapel Hill, the Smith Center, for Stanford. And afterwards, he said, I still got that Duke blood in me. Former
and that was
Duke
also
player.
A day after the Vanderbilt men had knocked off the Tennessee men. And yeah, a great weekend of college basketball across the board. But Michaela Blake's a previous her of the week. Yes, certainly had a hand in knocking off Tennessee for the first time by the Commodores, by the Doors. We love the Doors in 2024, 2025. First time they've won at Rocky Top since 2014.
Yeah, and Michaela Blakes, I think, is somebody we're going to be talking about for a long time. Just a freshman, averaging 20.2 points per game this season, which is 23rd in the country. One of the better freshmen in the SEC and one of the better freshmen in the nation. So that's Thursday night, Tennessee at Texas. Moving on to the entree. This is Saturday, 5:30 p.m. Eastern on Fox. We got number 6 UConn at Creighton. I put this on here because I think Creighton is probably the second best team in the Big East. And if UConn is going to get challenged at all in conference play, it's probably going to be here at Creighton. So, this is an easy to find game on Fox. So check this one out. And, maybe Creighton makes it a game. Maybe they don't.
If you weren't impressed by South Carolina defeating Oklahoma by 41 points, might I interest you in UConn knocking off a 13-5 Seton Hall squad by 60? We flipped the game over. We flipped over briefly to that game this weekend, and Kevin, my boyfriend, was like, "Why are we even watching this? Like Paige isn't even playing right now." And I was just like, it's an athletic marvel that needs to be admired. But yes, I agree with you. If there's any team that could threaten the Huskies, I think it's Creighton.
Yeah, and from that Seton Hall win, the thing I noticed was they're getting stuff from AZ Fudd. Knock on wood, she looks healthy right now, which is great. 18 points in 19 minutes, so super efficient game from her, helping them get that huge win over the Pirates. Sorry to Faith Masonius.
Happens. Also, shout out to Sarah Strong. All of the midseason awards. Look, MVP, I think there's a debate to be had in terms of the National Player of the Year. There is not when it comes to the National Freshman of the Year, because she led all scorers with 23 points in this one. And again, it's a 13-5 Seton Hall team. They're not ranked. I'm not saying they're world beaters, but it's not like this is UConn going up against Sister Mary's of the poor or something like that. These are legitimate Power 5 teams with double-digit wins, and it's just mincemeat. It's no problem whatsoever, and it's no problem whatsoever for a true freshman in Sarah Strong, the number 1 recruit in the country from a year ago.
Yeah, I think Sarah Strong is running away with freshman of the year. Our dessert that we have on Sunday at 2 p.m. Eastern on NBC, another really easy to find game. Number 1 UCLA at number 8 Maryland. Just to give folks a bit of a heads up, UCLA won big today, an afternoon game. This is the Coretta Scott King Classic. I think this is up in Brooklyn. Lauren Betts with 24 points, 9 rebounds, and 9 blocks. So almost triple-double with blocks in a 72-57 win over Baylor. And Maryland, which is playing right now as we speak, not looking so good. They're down 48-18 at halftime to Texas, which is not great. But I think this is going to be a good game. This is UCLA visiting College Park. Should be a good one. Interesting to see how Brenda Fries deals with Lauren Betts, who is playing some of her best basketball right now. Also interested to see how Maryland kind of grapples with the loss of Bree McDaniel, who is out for the season with a torn ACL, which is a real bummer.
I had actually put in our notes to take you guys behind the curtain. One of the first notes I made for last call was UCLA is blank, because, well, yes, they indeed knocked off a Penn State team earlier this weekend. That something tells me we'll circle back to at some point after they upset the once undefeated Buckeyes this past week as well. Outside of that, I mean, it's just ho-hum. An 83-49 win over a Purdue team on the road that they're just evenly matched. A 73-62 win over Indiana, which that win has aged rather well, given that Indiana certainly brought the other team from Southern California to the brink at Assembly Hall this weekend. An 86-70 win over that young Michigan team that everybody's so hyped about. But it's just been ho-hum for UCLA up to this point. And I'm waiting for that signature moment where we say, okay, I understand why they're the number team in the country, especially given what we just outlined about South Carolina, where I watch their games against top 15, top 20 talent. And I say, they don't have that marquee name. They don't have that headliner or quote unquote bus driver, but it's the Monstars out there. The length is ridiculous. The defensive efficiency is absurd. And they look like one of, if not the best team in the country.
Yeah, I think, I think the Coretta Scott King Classic is a great event. However, definitely unfortunate this year with the scheduling, because I don't think a lot of people were paying attention to UCLA Baylor today, just because, number one, it's, we got the inauguration going on. So a lot of people were tuned into pick your cable news channel of choice and paying attention to that. Number two, we got the college football national title game tonight. So I think a lot of people are just sort of consuming content and gearing up to that. So while it's great that both of these games, UCLA, Baylor, and Texas, Maryland were on Fox. I'm not sure that it's going to draw a great rating. I don't know if you could have moved these games or what. I know you want to have them on MLK Day. Just weird that the calendar kind of shaked out this way this season. But the good news is that UCLA has some more national TV games, and I think there's room for them to kind of create, that kind of signature moment. They certainly have a star player, Lauren Betts, who I think is probably a near lock to make, the first team All-American team this year. But they're going to play Rutgers on FS1 on Thursday. They got that game against Maryland on Sunday. Later in February, they got Ohio State on Peacock. They got USC on Peacock, Iowa on Peacock, and then they got USC on Fox. So the one good thing about conference realignment, we don't have to worry about trying to, find a weird streamer or finding the Pac-12 networks or whatever. Say it with your chest. Yeah. That is the silver lining of USC and UCLA going to the Big Ten is like these games are easy to find. Big Ten has good TV deals for its women's basketball programs. We don't have to work hard to watch Lauren Betts. So I think they're going to have their moment here soon. Certainly those two games against USC will be must watch.
And I do love the NBC time slot, even if it won't preempt NFL football. Like this past weekend, Indiana and USC did preempt the NFC divisional round game between the Rams and the Eagles. They did that last year with Nebraska and Iowa. I believe it was Fox for that, but there was another one that was NBC. Love that. Obviously, last year was to capitalize on the CaitlinClark effect. This year, it's probably to capitalize on Juju Watkins. Either way, I'm here for it. Again, the fact that NBC and Fox, we've reached a point where they are regularly televising women's college basketball, obviously speaks to their media rights deals, but it also speaks to the larger picture, which warms my heart. So That's your chef's table, folks. Again, keep your eyes out for Tennessee at Texas on Thursday night, UConn at Creighton, our main entree Saturday afternoon. And I love that dessert. Number 1 UCLA at number 8 Maryland, who they got to bounce back. They got to show us that they are the team that on this very podcast, Mitch and I said, justice for Brenda. She brings in 10 new players, and Brenda Freeze, all she does is win.
Yeah, Brenda Freeze, all she does is win. Yeah, good coaching matchup in UCLA and Maryland too, Corey Close and Brenda Freeze.
As we continue to look ahead to the week ahead, let's make some money, Mitch. How'd we do last week?
We went 2-1. Tennessee let me down by getting upset by Vanderbilt. But Notre Dame covered that 11.5 against Georgia Tech, and Rutgers covered that 14.5 against Michigan State. So we went 2-1, and we are now, I believe, 12-9 on the season. So we're in the positive. We are indeed making money.
I love it. I am not making money. That's why this is making money with Mitch, not making money with Mia. I did place a women's basketball game in my 5-game parlay for my midday MyBookie picks on 1010XL. I played the plus 14.5 for Georgia Tech as they went on the road to South Bend to face the Fighting Irish, and Georgia Tech lost by 15 points, Mitch. So I'm going to leave Vegas. I'm going to leave the sports betting to you. Who are we rolling with this week?
So this week, Thursday, I think this is probably kind of the game of the week. I put them here because I wanted to make a pick instead of putting them in chef's table. But this is Thursday night, 8 p.m. Eastern, ESPN, LSU at South Carolina. Super huge SEC matchup. I think last year when these two met, it was, I think, the highest rated regular season game of the year until CaitlinClark's record breaker against Michigan, or one of the CaitlinClark games. It was among one of the 5 highest viewed games of the regular season last year. Needless to say, a lot of people are going to be watching LSU at South Carolina. The line I'm seeing right now is South Carolina favored by 11.5 points. And I just think that's too many. I think LSU, despite playing that soft non-conference schedule that we've talked about, I think they're actually good. I think they've proven that so far in SEC play. Beating Tennessee, beating Vanderbilt. They've got some good wins on their resume. They beat NC State by 17 points. I think that they've kind of gotten their act together. They are 20-0, and that speaks for something, winning 20 games in a row. I think that they're going to be motivated because they lost this game last year, and they lost to South Carolina in the SEC tournament last year. I think Anissa Morrow is playing like one of the best players in the country, and Flau'jae Johnson and Michaela Williams stepping up too. So I think that they're going to keep this game within single digits. So I'll take LSU to cover 11.5.
Number one, you are a very brave soldier playing this game. I would go nowhere near this game, especially knowing it's in Columbia and especially knowing that South Carolina just knocked Oklahoma off by 41 points. So I think LSU is a better team than Oklahoma. I do. You are one brave, brave man, Mitchell Northam. I will also echo the words of Jimmy Dykes, who traditionally covers men's basketball, but on Anissa Morrow, the LSU forward, he said, quote, "She's tremendous at a lot of things. She is a star at consistency." That eloquently, succinctly says exactly what so many of us feel every time we watch the former DePaul forward turned LSU superstar on the floor.
Yeah, leading the nation in rebounds per game with 14.2. I feel like every time I look at an LSU box score, she's got 20 and 10 or sometimes 20 and 20. She's been awesome this season. And then you'll have games where, Michaela Williams coming off, I think, a week where she averaged 21 points per game and 2 wins for the Tigers. So, they've got a lot of good pieces despite no longer having Angel Reese. I think that LSU is legit. But we're going to find out for sure against South Carolina.
The next game you have on the docket in this week's Making Money with Mitch three-game slate, comes from the ACC. And I'm not going to lie, Mitch, I did not expect the result that we got at the Tuck Center in Tallahassee, Florida over the weekend. Florida State absolutely routs the Miami Hurricanes, or I don't want to say routes, but this was a double-digit victory that, don't get me wrong, Tanaya Latson should be a first-team All-American when all is said and done. But at the same time, I was a bit surprised to see that final box score.
Yeah, 88-66, won that game by 22 points. I do like Florida State this year. I think they're a good team. So this game that I'm picking here, this is on Sunday at noon on ACC Network. Tanaya Latson and Florida State visiting North Carolina. I see North Carolina favored by 4.5 points. I think the Tar Heels will win and cover that. I just think that defensively, North Carolina knows what it needs to do against Florida State and Tanaya Latson. And I think especially at home in Carmichael Arena, they'll have the upper hand. Florida State hasn't been great on the road this season. They lost back-to-back games on the West Coast earlier this month to Stanford and Cal. They also lost to Tennessee earlier this season, lost to Illinois. So, on the road, not as good as they are at home in Tallahassee. North Carolina, they've continued to roll, continue to play really well on defense ever since winning that rock fight against Duke. And a year ago,
that set the sport back a couple of years, but
it did. And a year ago, Florida State won this game. So I have to think that Alyssa Utsby and Maria Gokdang and those girls are going to be motivated to kind of get one back against the Seminoles here. So yeah, North Carolina 4.5. I like them to win and cover against Florida State.
And this third and final game in this week's slate, you just couldn't resist.
No, I couldn't resist. This is Sunday, 1 p.m. Eastern. This is on CBS Sports Network. It is game one of the Army-Navy game between the two women's basketball teams at the service academies in Annapolis and West Point. Both of them pretty good this year. Just one loss each in the Patriot League. I'm going with Navy here. Army is the favorite as the home team. They're favored by 4.5 points. I like Navy to cover that. I've seen Navy in person this year. I think they're a really solid team. They're 12-4 on the season so far. I think Tim Taylor has finally gotten, his group of players in there and build up some continuity. And he's got a player who I think is just an absolute walking bucket in Sanai Barnett-Gay. She's averaging 19.7 points per game this year, 8.2 rebounds, 3.4 assists. She's just awesome. She kind of does everything for them. And I think she's going to give them the edge against Army.
For those of you keeping score, that's this week's Making Money with Mitch. LSU plus 11.5, North Carolina minus 4.5, and the United States Naval Academy plus 4.5. 12-9 record. Roll with Mitch. Don't roll with me. just Godspeed if you want to listen to my midday MyBookie picks. I'm trying to incorporate more women's basketball lines because very excited for my friends at MyBookie who have now decided to come to the good side, come join us, the resistance, and they have added women's basketball to their sports book. It's time for last call, the storylines we missed in today's episode, and it is time, Mitch. It is time. 2 weeks ago? Was it last week? I forget. It's a flat circle. Time is a flat circle. Life is a blur, especially when you are a fan of the Iowa women's basketball program, who have now lost 5 games in a row for the first time since 2013. We sat here in these very seats the last 2 weeks. We defended Jan Jensen. I'm still defending Jan because there is a rainbow or pot of gold at the end of this not so bright rainbow. That is the fact that they have Addie Deal coming in, 5-star recruit out of the state of California. They've got 2 4-stars, including Journey Houston out of Davenport North coming in. That will complete these back-to-back marquee recruiting classes that Jan Jensen and once upon a time Lisa Bluter were able to put together. All 4 of their freshmen have played significant roles to the point that Jan has said in multiple post-game press conferences, I'm seeing the most energy and consistency out of the 4 of them. So I'd rather play them. And this is where it makes it very difficult for me to comprehend what's going on in Iowa City. I would rather play them because I'm seeing energy and consistency from them compared to, I don't know, Hannah Stolke, Sita Fulter, Kylie Feuerbach, multiple players who have not only played in the Final Four, Mitch, they've played in 2, and they've been to 2 national championships. So I don't want to say I'm #worried about Iowa yet, but I am concerned. I just keep looking ahead to next year, and I go back to when I was covering this team, when they were able to put together 2 top 20 classes, the first of which included the likes of future National Player of the Year Megan Gustafson, current Iowa assistant coach Tania Davis. The next year, they bring in Kathleen Doyle and company, another future Big Ten Player of the Year. And so I have faith that lightning can strike twice because that's how this program has been built for the better part of the last 20 years. But at the same time, yikes, I did not see this coming in 2025.
Yeah, I felt really good about Iowa, at the turn of the year. And then since then, after beating Penn State on New Year's Day, like you said, 5 losses in a row. The one kind of, so we're not kind of sounding the emergency alarm here, like all these losses are by single digits. And all of them, I think, to teams that are going to make the NCAA tournament. Lost to Maryland by 8, Illinois by 5, Indiana by 7, Nebraska by 3 in overtime, Oregon by 1 in a game where you didn't have Hannah Stolke because she had a concussion.
And where you led, though, by 15 points in the first half.
Indeed. I think there is some questions about just sort of offensive execution and consistency and maybe kind of figuring out sort of what the identity there is. Early in the season, it was, Addie O'Grady was going to work and doing some really good things. And then you have Lucy Olson doing her thing and, Hannah Stolke, kind of helping out where she could. I'm not sure like what the offensive identity is right now for this team, but you probably need to get 2 more wins or 2 wins in your next 2 games at Washington and home against Northwestern, because after that you got to face USC and then you got to face another team that's ranked in Minnesota. And then you got to go to Nebraska, a team you just lost to. So the schedule doesn't get any easier for them. So how they finish out Big Ten play and then go into the Big Ten tournament, it's going to impact their NCAA tournament resume. When you lose 5 games in a row, you don't want that to keep snowballing. So need to put some tallies in the W column for sure.
#not worried about Iowa. I'm very excited, however. Once again, I think it bears repeating for Vanderbilt. Our Doors, I misspoke, by the way, Mitch. It's the Doors' first victory over Tennessee, not on Rocky Top. This game took place in Nashville. That's why we had court stormings for both the women's and men's team. I don't know if they actually stormed for the women's, but I'm going to pretend they did because it was such a massive upset victory for a Vanderbilt team that does have double-digit wins this season and certainly has been a factor so far in the early part of conference play. But still, we're going to say they stormed the court. First victory at all over the University of Tennessee since 2014. Their first ranked win since 2022. Michaela Blakes is underrated. I know we already said that Sydney Strong has wrapped up National Freshman of the Year, but I do think Michaela Blakes will be on the first team when all is said and done.
Yeah, I think Shea Ralph is building something very good at Vanderbilt. They made the NCAA tournament last year. I think they're going to make the tournament again this year. I mean, they only have 4 losses this year, all to pretty solid teams. Lost to Michigan State, Kentucky, Ole Miss, LSU, and really a good timing for them to get the win over Tennessee because they were riding a 3-game losing streak. So you break that, and now you go into a stretch of your schedule where you have some winnable games in the SEC, Arkansas, Alabama, Florida, Ole Miss, before you have to face Texas, which is going to be a tough game. That's a game down in Austin on February 6th. But yeah, I really like what Shea Ralph is building there at Vanderbilt. They got some good players, Camille Pierre, Michaela Blakes, we've talked about a lot. Jordan Oliver, who's a veteran that's been around. Justine Passat coming off the bench. Some really good players. So Vanderbilt, I think the future is bright.
Just wanted to give Vanderbilt the love it deserves. Also because our friends at Cal took a step back this past week. So we need to take our energy that we had given, all of our love that we were dividing equally between Georgia Tech and Cal, and we transfer some of that to the Commodores in the lovely city of Nashville.
Yeah, Cal I still like. I just, when they run up against a team, Cal is like all about ball movement and getting the ball in the right places. Like they don't have athletes that are going to like blow you away, and Duke does. And like when you play against a team at Duke that has those athletes that can just put the clamps on you and run you out of the gym, Cal is going to be outmatched and in some trouble in that game. They bounced back and got a win at Wake Forest, but yeah, not so great against Duke. I hope for Sharman Smith that they don't run up against the Blue Devils when they get to the ACC tournament in Greensboro, but we'll see.
2 more from me briefly. Shout out to PaigeBueckers, the fastest player since Maya Moore to 2,000 points. Am I saying that one correctly, Mitch?
That is correct.
It's fastest to 2,000 points.
Yeah, she beat Maya Moore there, I think by 6 games, I think was the number, which is wild. I just like when you can beat Maya Moore in anything that has to do with basketball, you're probably pretty good. And PaigeBueckers, as we know, is pretty good.
She's a pretty good basketball player. Will she win National Player of the Year? That remains to be seen, and probably a debate for next week after we see Hannah Hidalgo at full strength with the Fighting Irish after missing a couple games. And finally, I wanted to end on this, especially since I started last call with my concerns about one team in the state of Iowa. I don't have any concerns right now, at least as of this week, for Bill Fenley's Iowa State squad, because they scored 71 points, Mitch, and they did not score a 3-point basket. It was the first time in 945 games. That streak began February 19th, 1995 at Colorado. It finally ends. Audi Crooks said she didn't even realize. She felt bad, but they won. So they just keep it moving.
Yeah, they won that game. And, another game that I was surprised that the spread didn't cover was their game at West Virginia. Iowa State or West Virginia was favored by 13.5. And I was like, Audi Crooks, Addie Brown, they'll be able to cover. They're missing Emily Ryan, though, who I think is a big part of their success this year. And West Virginia beat them by 14. So Iowa State did not cover, and West Virginia gets another win at home in Morgantown. Like we said before, Big 12 wide open. Still could come down to Iowa State. We saw them do some damage last year when it came to March Madness with Audi Crooks. Could see some magic again this year in the Big 12 tournament or in the Big Dance.
And much like we're blaming Nashville for Vanderbilt knocking off Tennessee, both in the men's and the women's ranks, we will stay the same. Morgantown, the magic of Morgantown. That is why Iowa State.
Hard place to play.
Yes. Harder than a weekend in your in-laws. No, I think that's VCU. I forget what that saying is. But yes, West Virginia claims the Iowa State men's team and the Iowa State women's team this past weekend. Mitch, you got anything else before we head out of here?
I do not. Going to be a fun week of college basketball after we have some football tonight. It's going to be good, and it's been good.
I'm very excited. I don't have any games I'm calling this week, so I get to kind of like enjoy and just watch games. My new TV setup in our living room will officially be ready tomorrow. We were hoping it would be set up for the national championship game. It's all good. When I have my 3 multi-TV fancy set up, I can't wait to lock in and watch those games we have on Chef's Table and so many more this week. from the men's and women's ranks. He's Mitch. I'm Mia. This has been the women's basketball podcast. We feel like the women's college basketball podcast at times. We're excited to watch Unrivaled. We're excited for the pro game to come on back. Free agency, folks. Next time we are here listening and talking to you, we will be talking about WNBA free agency as well as the very latest in the college game. We'll see you next week.
Deuces.